All right, ladies and gentlemen, members, friends and guests of the Malaysian Dutch Business Council and of our speakers, welcome at our webinar on work and mental health balance. My name is Marco Winter. As we are asking you today, as you can see from our backgrounds, how are you really? Or maybe we should ask, how are you really? In conjunction with World Mental Health Day, this is a great opportunity for us to provide you with this utmost important topic as part of our ongoing MDBC Human Resources Forum. This HR forum used to be a once-a-year event, but since we all had to work from home last year and HR became an even more important topic, we have had the main focus of our webinars on a wide variety of HR-related topics, such as work from home, visa and travel regulations, mental health, and even lifestyle-related, such as healthy cooking, staying fit, and good posture. Today, we are very pleased to welcome 4 MDBC member companies returning to our HR forum as expert speakers and moderator. To take you through this session, it is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Marit Tseng, Founding Director of Cultural Impact Sdn Bhd, who has entertained us this past year with sessions such as the famous Between the Lines Exchange Theater and with How to Deal with the Dutch. As an expert on this latest topic, Marie is properly dressed in orange today. Thank you, Marie. And over to you, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Marco. I expected that from you. Welcome, everyone. So it's my pleasure to be with you today and to facilitate this conversation on a really important topic. So as Marco said, October 10th was, we celebrated the World Health Day. This has been celebrated since 1992, but I think this year with the pandemic, it took a particular importance and had a greater echo even in the corporate world. Addressing well-being of employees is not anymore just a nice to have, but a crucial aspect of leadership to maintain performance and attract talents. So today we have 3 experts who will help us understand better the challenges to overcome, as well as share advice and good practices that they've been using. In the next hour, each speaker will do a short 10-minute presentation. While this is happening, feel free to post your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. So you have the chat and the Q&A. Please use the Q&A. It will make it easier for us to track your question and ensure that all questions are answered at the end of the 3 presentation or later if that's necessary. Right. So first, to set the stage, I'm very happy to invite Lim Si-er, Client Development Consultant for Thomas International Asia Pacific. Si-er will share with us insight into how technology impacts stress and anxiety in society and at work. Thank you. The floor is yours, Si-er.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Mary. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are on the world. It's my pleasure today to introduce the first topic for today's mental health webinar. So basically, tech and social media is such a huge space. So we will only be scratching the surface with what I'm going to discuss about today. Adeline, would you mind to share? Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so let me give you guys a really brief introduction about Thomas International before we go into the topic itself. So we are celebrating 40th birthday this year. We offer a suite of assessment tools in helping organizations to identify the right candidates and help the people develop their potential. We are committed to employees' mental well-being. My apology, we basically have 17 certified mental health first aiders in the company, to be exact. So we have really good ratio as compared to the total number of employees. So these are some examples what Thomas has been doing in supporting better mental health at work. I think some are self-explanatory. So what I would like to talk about is probably Thomas using Thomas, in case you're wondering what's that. So to walk the talk, we have been using our emotional intelligence assessment and behavior assessment in addressing and helping our people with emotional resilience, potential frustrations, and etc. So the topic today is actually one of our well-being series talks we organize internally. But I think this is a good avenue to share with all of you, and hopefully you would find some important takeaway. So basically, trying to imagine our life without technology is practically impossible. Technology of reliance, of course, has been heightened by the global pandemic. It could be anything from entertainment, work, education, personal life, e-commerce, and etc. So these days, there are more entertainment options at home than there are outside the home. So the creation of social media has allowed people to even engage with other humans whom you don't even know or haven't met before. So before I share some statistics of technology reliance, it would be nice if there are two questions on the poll, which I would appreciate if Adeline, you could help to share or launch it. And yeah, of course, your participation would be greatly appreciated. So the first question is asking about how long do you look at your phone per day? So I made a really specific remark over there. It's not including work-related mobile phone use. So let's take a look. Oh, so the last option is actually 4 to 5 hours. So yeah, just in case, sorry, it's more than 5 hours for the last option. So if you think that you spend longer than 5 hours on your phone, please, go for the last option. And then the second question is asking about how dependent are you on your mobile phone? So the list goes on. So there are so many other examples that can illustrate one's dependency on mobile phone. But this poll, it's good to reflect and understand some of your technology dependence. So please take a few seconds to answer the questions. And Adeline, you may show the results when it's done. Thank you so much. All right, so while waiting for the poll to be...
Shall we just do a countdown here? 10,
oh,
9,
I think...
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.5, 2.5, 1.5, 1.5. Okay, guys, thank you. Here we are.
Thank you so much. So as we can see, we have a higher percentage. Basically, if we look at the question 1, up to more than 3 hours. If I may actually simplify that, we have 3 to 4 hours, and then we have more than 5 hours. So looking at the second questions, we do see some leading choices. And, like use phone as an alarm clock, for instance, check your phone within 10 minutes before bedtime and after you wake up in the morning. So let's see, how does all this relate to statistics? So 59.5% of global populations are internet users, with 84.2% of Malaysia populations are internet users. So the next one you see, 77% say that society as a whole rely too much on technology to succeed. So basically, this was done by Penn State University back in 2015. I believe the figure would be much higher nowadays. Regarding succeed, it could be career progression, daily work tasks, whether that to be completing a new or existing hobby, shopping, or in some cases, gaming. So tech is generally involved in everything these days. So our poll is quite consistent with what we found, basically, by a few studies and research, where people tend to spend around 3 to 4 hours. That's the average time we spend on smartphone daily. So the next one is probably more shocking. A national survey of more than 2,800 Australian smartphone users found 99% exhibited some degree of nomophobia. So the term nomophobia or no mobile phone phobia is used to describe a psychological condition when people have anxiety or fear caused by not having a working mobile phone. So we have 37% experience mild symptoms, nearly half experienced the phobia in the moderate range, and 13% had a severe case. So I couldn't find any similar study in Malaysia, but this study was published in the Star newspaper as well, in case if you want to have a look. So since the crisis and our screens are not going anywhere anytime soon, it's by taking control of our digital well-being that we can use screens to our advantage. A big part of technology where it can impact us is social media, something which has grown exponentially over the last 20 years. There's so many social media platforms out there. You name it, they've got it. So to understand the global impact of social media, so again, we look into some statistics. So the interesting one that probably I would like to highlight is the average users have 9.6 different social media accounts. And this is the statistics for Malaysia. So this figure may not indicate active use of all accounts every month. I've added my own and I have 7 accounts at the moment. So as so many of us are using social media, there must be lots of positive for having these accounts. Globally connected is a huge one. So especially when we haven't been able to have that face-to-face connection. Personally, I use social media for connecting with people that are living outside of Malaysia, for entertainment, real-time news, learning purposes. Well, if we look at the other side, feeling insecure as having, that constant comparison between yourself and the others, wondering if you have done enough, achieved enough, or perhaps looking good enough. So bullying, social media graffiti, and it could be a distraction as well, whether it's at school or at work. Fake news and confirmation bias or misinformation is also an issue on social media platform as well. So those pros and cons have different levels of impact. So let's talk about the signs that we can look out for to indicate the effects of social media. So if we could feel distracted from work or other priorities, and if the distraction is impacting your productivity and mental health, then it's a concern that needs to be addressed. We could be lacking in self-care, for instance, suffering from sleep problems. We might be immersing in social media and neglecting face-to-face communication and relationship. We could have worsening symptoms of anxiety or depression. Most importantly, what I'm trying to link everything into something that's called the stress container. You may or may not have heard of this, but if you imagine your stress as a little container, certain things can build up and potentially be overflowing. So the examples could be family, friends, health, and so on. So with the level of impact being different for everyone, tech and social media is exactly the same and filters into that stress container. So it could be a small little thing which has minor or no impact to someone, but it could be a huge, massive thing for someone else. So it's really important to be aware of your stress level and how to address them.
Okay, Sia, you have a few seconds to finish.
Absolutely. Let's go into some top tips, because if you do feel tech and social media is building up on your stress container, and hopefully you find some tips to be useful. So the first one, I think you can't improve what you don't measure. So really a quick win would be to track your screen time and reduce your time online. So on iPhones, and I'm sure you can do it on Android as well, you can set downtime or limiting time on social media apps, and Google should be able to help you with it. If you're scrolling social media mindlessly, changing your focus is also a great way to start thinking about what you're doing. You don't go online just because you're bored. Spend more time offline. I think this is also very self-explanatory. Do anything which is not so technology-based. This is pretty difficult, I must say, but resist the temptation to check your phone at least first 50 minutes. And once you've succeeded, you move on to half an hour. That's how you can start doing it. The next one, which I personally think it's pretty effective because I've tried this, delete apps you don't really use or get benefit from. So by retaining the minimum, you will not get sucked into the scrolling rabbit hole. Finally, you can always ask for help. I'm pretty sure that there are people who are willing to listen, or you can reach out to professional services. So some final thoughts. What I would like to highlight here is screens are not completely awful. So social media is not a threat. We can see that there's so many positive, but I think the key is to not let them get the best of us. Understanding the possible impact can definitely take you a step closer to digital well-being. Thank you for your time, and over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Sia, for a really comprehensive overview on how we use and help us realize also our own flaws in how we use social media. I wasn't too sure how to answer your poll. So thank you, and thank you for quick tips. So that's and for setting the stage for our conversation. So our next speaker, Fahad Naim, Head of Operation Malaysia for Randstad Malaysia, will share with us his view from the perspective of employers and explore whether caring for your employees is important or not to drive your talent attraction strategy. Fahad, over to you.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here with everyone today. Well, as the title of the presentation says, is that does caring for your employee drive the talent attraction strategy? So no doubt, currently the pandemic has exerted the candidates and employee expectations, and definitely is changing. Its expectations are increasing day by day. There's now much of a higher focus on hybrid work and upskilling to prepare better for the future of work. Now, more and more companies, as we see, that is scaling up to implement hybrid work expectations. The companies are coming up with new policies to meet the workforce expectations. Let's take a closer look of how an employer can strengthen their EVP, which is your employee value proposition, and agility to attract and retain the employees in the next new norm. So the time is limited here. I will try to briefly touch some topics, especially how COVID-19 has changed the way we work and we learn, understand the local workforce expectation, how employer can strengthen their EVP to attract and retain employees, reskilling and upskilling your existing workforce, and last but not least is how do you optimize your employee experience? So let me see if I have a control. Sorry. All right, that's just me. I think you guys have already seen the introduction slide before. I have over a decade experience working in staffing or recruitment companies in a couple of regions. I spend most of my time in Malaysia and Singapore. Currently heading Randstad Malaysia for perm recruitment. All right, so the topic, as you know, there's been a lot of discussions about work-life balance and mental health recently. And there's a new term that we hear quite often now. It's called work from home syndrome. We hear about a lot of burnout, stress that people are experiencing in a remote or hybrid working model. It's nothing new. I think we've been hearing a lot even before pandemic as well, but I think hybrid work and remote management has a part to play in it. Less social interaction, overwork, or short, stressing out, managing the work-life balance. So I'm going to share some stats with you which we have been conducting different survey. There is Randstad employer branding research that we conduct in 34 countries every year, and it is very independent to each countries. For Malaysia, we conducted this in Jan 2021, where 69% of respondents, which are job seekers or employees, said they see work-life balance as one of the most important factor to consider as an attractive employer. And if we look into a little bit more detail, All right, so here's the stats where, just give me a second. It's the slide is going a little out of control. Right, can we go back to the previous slide? Somehow I'm not able to control. Okay, thank you. So here is in the report that we conduct, we basically ask job seekers, what are the top attractive points that you look for when you look for a new job or when you're seeking for a new employer? So number one comes as attractive salary and benefit, which hasn't changed in many years. Work-life balance significantly increasing from year to year, which was 48% in 2020. And in 2021, January, when we conducted the survey, it was at 69%. Significantly improving year to year, followed by COVID-19 safe environment, financially healthy, career progression, and the list goes on. But on the other hand, when we start looking at what employer in Malaysia are perceived to offer, we see financially healthy, a good reputation, COVID safe environment, career progression, job security, and the list goes on, where we see the biggest, most unmet candidate expectation is work-life balance, which is a number 9. And when we ask what is, as an ideal employer, when the candidates are looking for a job, work-life balance considered to be the second most important EVP. So there's a huge gap there in between. Okay, so here's some of the stats from the white paper released by Relate Mental Health Malaysia, which a study says that total productivity and a business cost lost due to mental health issues at work was estimated about 14.46 billion in 2018. And that is almost more than 1% of the country GDP itself. There's a whole detailed report studied about some of the top employers in Malaysia. But 3 factors they've included in why there's a loss of productivity in business is absenteeism, presenteeism, and the employee turnover. Other facts to look into, mental health service, private therapists and counselor cost between 200 to 500 per session. And the other affordable options are between 50 to 100 per session. And what was one of the most surprising fact was there are roughly about only 1 psychiatrist to 100,000 people. So let's look at some other stats here that we have collected through. Okay, so 55% of the Malaysian will stay with the employer. That came out into Work Monitor survey report that we conducted in the first half of the year. That is because how Malaysian companies have responded to counter hybrid working and a remote working model. So there was a very positive response where 55% of the employees said they will stay with the same employer in 2021, and which is highest in Southeast Asia, based on the report that we have conducted in other countries as well. Moving on to the next slide, we are. Okay, so best way where employer could manage better in a hybrid or remote working environment is by leading through empathy and trust. There will, if we were to make a suggestions to the companies, there are 3 things you need to look into. First is understanding employee sentiment. That is can be done through conducting a regular survey, weekly basis or monthly basis, just to hear how your employees are feeling. Are they feeling burnout? Is anyone feeling stress? And then you have a 2-way feedback communication with them to manage the expectation better. The other one is training your middle management. Your managers need to be trained how to manage your employees or staff in a new hybrid or remote working model, which is leading through empathy and trust. Last but not least, HR need to play a very important role, where we might need to look into now revising some of the compensations and benefit that we used to offer before pandemic, and now has to change, where a lot of outdoor activities which we used to offer as benefits, as gym membership or traveling for training overseas, now might have to change into something where offering a home allowance for paying for the internet, or maybe offering a mental health counseling sessions once a quarter or once a year. So all these sort of things that HR need to come up with the new policies to revise the benefits being offered before. Now, so Moving on swiftly to some of the best practices we see in the market where companies are doing really well, where Nike, LinkedIn, and a couple of other organizations, names you see, are offering paid time off to support mental health. And then we have Facebook and a couple of other companies dedicated no meeting day just to make sure that employees are coming out of this video calls or Zoom fatigue. And then Malaysia, Shell Malaysia and AIS Singapore, one-time no string attached allowance for employees in order for them to spend on IT equipments or pay for home utilities, buy a nice chair or table to make sure that employees are feeling they're well taken care and they can create this more productive environment working from home. A couple of other examples that I can share is the best way to get the better productivity out of employees is looking at more quality approach rather than quantity and using data to measure performance, as some of the examples that we looked into was Kilo and Exhibits. So these two companies where we saw that the approach has changed from pure metrics to going toward the goal achievement, setting up timeline, coming out from the process-driven approach to an outcome-based approach. So I think this is next thing that employers need to look into, where you do not need to know what your employees are doing on hourly basis, but rather be an outcome-based approach. And for engagement, some of the good practices we saw was Changi Airport Group, which they came up with the promoting health related activities through a vitality points. So people are encouraged to do more health activities, collect points, and then they gamified it. So many other companies are doing similar, trying to gamify things and trying to create more engagement. Randstad, what we did is we transformed our offline training program and made it available almost about 2,000 plus on-demand training modules to Randstad Online University, which any employee can access anytime. All right, so we have only 1 minute left, so let me just quickly run through this. Some of the suggestions that we have for the organizations is all the best practices you have in your organizations right now, especially to counter health or health well-being or mental health. It has to be out on the social media. Social media is the second most channel used for job seekers in order to search for a new employer, as well as employees are not afraid to share the experience with the existing employer. Good or bad is all out on social media to make your perception better in the market. All the good things you're doing in the organizations and how your employees are feeling, you have to make a use of social media to make sure that you manage your perception. And the last slide that I have is some of the best practices we would suggest to the companies, again, to conduct a regular survey to hear your employee feedback, spend some time with your managers to teach them how to manage remotely. It is very easy. It is much common to come across as less empathetic when you manage your people online. So it has to be a more balanced approach. Set the right work boundaries where people are overworking, spending time after working hours, limiting your work-related conversations to only your emails and work-related platform. Do not switch it to WhatsApp and all the other personal channels. Regular checks with your team, more constant communication. There's no FaceTime, there's no social interaction. So there has to be different touch point where employees still feel inclusive. I know, Mary, we're running out of time. This one, if you would like to download the report, there's a lot more stats and detail, or you could reach out to me. You have seen my LinkedIn ID. I'm more than happy to share more details. Thanks, Mary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fahad. And both of you here, you were very much in time as well. I appreciate that. Really interesting insight. And I loved how you concluded with social media, when that echoed a little bit what Sia was saying in terms of how do we make good use of that and prevent the challenges that it may bring. And it was actually a question I had on how do we balance the fact that companies are using it with the fact that we need to be mindful about how as individual we use it. So thank you both for, as I said, setting the stage and showing that clearly the answer to your question, initial question, Fahad, is that yes, companies need to care about their employees to create more engagement. But sometimes the challenge we face is how do we do that? How do as individual are we mindful of our well-being, and how maybe as manager can we help our team members and co-workers to can we support them? So for this, I'm very happy to welcome our last speaker, Tracy Gan, who's a Chief Medical Advisor for the Response Center of International SOS. And she will give us some practical first aid tips for emotion to address well-being issue at an individual levels in organizations. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Marie. Good afternoon, everyone. So here we are. So today the title for me would be First Aid for Your Emotions. So you'll see me switching from here to there because I have two screens currently, so just don't mind me. So I would like to start by saying, if you come from a family that has more than one sibling, there is always a debate on whether favoritism is being well played. But that aside, did you realize we too practice favoritism on ourselves as well? And how do you ask? Is by how much we value our body over the mind. So just to let you know, I'll share an experience with you. I was at a friend's place the other day and they had a 5-year-old boy. So he was running to the sink to brush his teeth, and while doing so, he tripped and fell and he scraped his knee. But what's interesting is he knew how to take a Band-Aid from the medicine cupboard and tend to his wounds. So we all have been taught since young to brush our teeth as a form of practicing dental hygiene, and we put on Handyplus or Band-Aid when we have a cut. We know it since we were young as 5 years old. Now I want you to ask yourself, what do you know about maintaining your psychological or mental health? Safe to say that for most of us, the answer is nothing. How do we spend more time taking care of our teeth than our mind? Why do we put our physical health above our psychological health? So do you know that we sustain psychological injuries more often than we sustain physical ones? Now, before I dive in deeper on how do we take care of our psychological health, let's just quickly look at why this is important to keep our mental and physical health well balanced. You see, they're all linked to one another. For those who are not familiar, there is a hormone called cortisol hormone, which is also known as the stress hormone. So to give you an overview on why this stress hormone isn't your friend when your stress gets out of hand. So if you're constantly stressed, the stress hormone will be released into your system, and long-term exposure to these hormones can cause a whole set of problems such as digestive issues, cardiovascular problem, long-term joint and muscle ache, and that unexplained headache and migraines that you always have. So in the long run, your life expectancy and your quality will reduce as well. So how do we start taking care of our mental health? So psychological injuries, I just want to name a few, are things like rejection, failure, isolation, and they can get worse if we ignore it. And if we do happen to leave it unattended long enough, it can impact our lives in dramatic ways. So how do we start taking care of our mental or psychological health, you may ask? You close the gap between the physical and psychological gap. But how? It is by having emotional hygiene. And how do we practice emotional hygiene? Well, let's begin. So the first is by paying attention to your emotional pain. So we all know that if we have a small physical injury, let's say a cut, and when it becomes more painful over time, we are aware that it is likely a sign of a more serious infection and we seek medical attention. Now ask yourself, are you aware of how your mind reacts to failure? Because you need to be. Because when you're faced with setbacks, your mind tries to tell you that you're incapable of something and you believe it and you begin to feel helpless and stop trying and be more convinced that you can't do it. All it takes is just one failure and it can convince us into thinking that we are never going to succeed. And when you are convinced, it's very hard to change your mind about it. So the next time you're faced with an outcome you do not like, you feel sad, angry, frustrated, I want you to acknowledge this emotional pain that you're going through. But you don't let that voice in your head tell you that you are a failure and prevent you from trying again. So what are the steps you can do to understand the emotions that you're currently going through? So number one, think about it. You have a quick silent conversation with yourself. It might go something like this. What am I feeling right now? It might be anger. So let's say we put an emotion to it. It's called anger. Second, we write about it. So writing also helps you visualize the emotions and makes it less obvious. Well, more obvious when it's in writing. The third is you verbalize it. So every time you come across a situation that causes you to have negative emotions, verbalize it to that person. it can simply just state, I'm realizing I'm quite irritated with you right now, therefore I would like to take this conversation another time. So this allows you to label your emotions out loud and safely exit the difficult conversation before it escalates. So once you've understand or give a name to your emotions, now you accept them. So as a human being, you're going to have all kinds of emotions, just like there are all kinds of weather. These emotions are more than just anything else, just a part of being a living human being. So you've accepted them now you reason with them. So I'll give you a scenario, and this is a real life for me. So you've been planning to meet up with your good friend for the past few months, right? And then you make all these plans, and finally it's the day of the meeting or a day before of the meeting. So the excitement, it builds up, and you text them. You text them, let's say last week, and then you say, hey, are we still on for our meeting tomorrow? They didn't reply you. Okay, so you text them the day before of the meeting. And you say, hey, just checking in, are we still on for tomorrow? Finally, after 4 hours to reply one text, they reply you and they say, I can't. That's all they reply after waiting for so long. And obviously, you're suddenly extremely upset. Without stopping to think, you hurl your phone across the room, you knock over your waste paper basket, you kick your desk, you stub your toe. Of course, I'm dramatizing the response, but this is stemming from anger. So when you're going through this, interrupt yourself by asking, number one, what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling disappointed? Am I confused? Am I furious? And what happened to make me feel this way? Is it because they brushed me off with no explanation at all? Does the situation have a different explanation that might make sense? Maybe they're stressed, maybe they're sick, or they're dealing with something they don't feel comfortable explaining. They might explain a little more when they can. And what do I do about these feelings? Do I want to scream, vent my frustration by throwing things, or I want to text back something rude? And then lastly, is there a better way I can cope with this? Do you want to ask them if everything's okay? Or you want to ask them when you're free next? Or if you really want to text back something rude, like what I did, you go for a walk or a run and then you come back to it later. So by considering possible alternatives, you're reframing your thoughts, which can help you modify your first extreme reaction. Number two is you stop emotional bleeding. So our minds and our feelings, as we all know it, they're not the most reliable friend, right? It can be very supportive 1 minute and a really not nice friend the next. So I want you to notice how you talk to yourself whenever you are faced with a rejection. It's usually filled with the unkindest words you can think of. Yes, you can feel defeated and demoralized after you fail, but you cannot allow yourself to be convinced that you cannot succeed, because emotions, they're strong, they're very capable of bringing out the best, but also the worst in ourselves. So when you find yourself overwhelmed by your feelings, remember that they will come and go. So allow yourself to experience all of your emotions, but don't let them define you. So let's just say, another example, you haven't heard back from your boss about this huge proposal that you worked tirelessly on. And then you start blaming yourself. You start thinking, oh dear, my proposal was so bad. He doesn't even want to talk about it. I'm such a failure. I can never succeed. Hey, why not have an alternating thought? Maybe it can go like this. He's probably too busy and will look into it. But even if it's bad, it's something I can definitely learn and improve on. So inevitably, there will be tough times in your life. There are going to be moments where your heart aches so bad, it might fall out of your chest. There may also be excruciating periods of sadness that seems endless. But in those times, don't lose hope. Also, don't let those times define you or your life, whether this feeling stems from loss, failure, relationships, or unexplained emotions. Just remember, they're an inherent part of life, but they don't last forever. So number three, being very mindful of time here, protect the self-esteem. So if you notice, our self-esteem, it fluctuates from day to day and sometimes from hour to hour, much as our physical immune system does. So when you're having a good self-esteem day, we not only feel different about ourselves, but we respond differently to stresses from our environment. So specifically, having low self-esteem leaves us more vulnerable to many of the psychological injuries we sustain in daily life. So people with low self-esteem are also more vulnerable to failure in that they experience greater drops in motivation and show less persistence after failing than those with higher self-esteem. So how do we protect our self-esteem? You practice self-compassion exercise. You treat yourself like how you would treat a good friend. You be kind, you be understanding to yourself, and you don't be judgmental. Being aware of painful feelings without being overwhelmed by them are overly identifying with them. You'll be surprised in time, you'll be more self-forgiving and self-compassionate to yourself, and you learn to speak more kindly to yourself. So number 4 is battle negative thinking. So it's very natural to think about distressing events, but when our thinking becomes repetitive, we're no longer problem solving, we are ruminating. So ruminate means to chew over and over again. And in this case, it's thinking about it over and over again. It's when your boss yells at you, or you had a fight with your friend and you just can't stop playing that scene in your head for days and sometimes weeks and even months. It can easily become a habit, and it's a dangerous one, because by constantly replaying the scene and spending so much time and thoughts in this negative cycle, you're actually putting yourself at risk for depression, cardiovascular risk, and substance abuse. Study shows that 2-minute distraction or interruption is sufficient to break the urge to ruminate. So every time you find yourself playing the scene of an upsetting event, you force yourself to do something that requires your focus. Required to shift your focus. So number 5 is becoming aware of the psychological wounds. So this is the last one. So you often hear people say that, if you're depressed, you shake it off, you sleep it off, it's all in your head. I want to ask you this. Have you ever said to a person who has a broken leg, you walk it off, it's all in your leg? Sounds strange, isn't it? So why do we not address our psychological wounds as important as our physical wounds? Because healing wounds, it takes time. And when you suffer from psychological pain, you become sensitive to things that didn't bother you before. These things may seem harmless to other people, but they touch you deeply and cause further hurt. Maybe you feel particularly bothered when your boss points out an error in your work, but your coworker, they seem to move on quickly. Maybe this could be because when you were younger, your parents were very critical of you as a child, so now you're overly sensitive to criticism as an adult. After you start healing from these emotional wounds, maybe your boss comments won't have the same impact anymore. And when you notice that a situation bothers you more than you think it should, you likely have an emotional wound that has been triggered. So conclusion, keep in mind that having good mental or psychological health doesn't mean you're always happy or free from negative emotions. We're being realistic here. It's about having the skills and resources to manage the ups and downs of day-to-day life. It's about addressing the emotional injury and giving them the amount of attention like you would to physical injury. So I say it's time mental health deserves the same amount of attention like physical health. So before I wrap up, just a quick one. I'd like to leave you with this. This is to help raise awareness around mental health. International SOS has a Spot the Risk online questionnaire. So you could scan this QR code. It's an open access platform providing information that building awareness into the indicators and influences on mental health. I encourage you to scan this, or you can visit our website to assess what is your mental health risk status. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tracy. A whole lot of advice for all of us to reflect and look at in how we can take better care of ourselves, but also maybe better care of people around us. So thank you to our 3 speakers this afternoon. I really enjoyed your perspective on both. Social media was a big one, but what do we do about mental health? And I see we have a first question in the Q&A to see how, as employers, you actually walk the talk of creating a better space for mental health. So the question comes from Theophile. How about during a midday at work, you're feeling overwhelmed and can't concentrate? Would it be okay to inform your employer that we need to take a break? Would that harm their impression of us? So I'm curious to hear it from each of you. How in Thomas, Randstad, or SOS would people react to such a situation? Sierra, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So my boss is in the call, by the way. So. But this is a culture which we have basically preached and practiced a lot in Thomas International. So it's not just the bi-weekly check-in or quarterly review. So during our team meetings, we basically address this. And if we are able to spot the signs that people or your team member, it's not well, then, we will approach, my manager will approach us, and yeah, we basically have that conversations. And if we are really feeling overwhelmed, and that's a moment where we need to take a pause, Thomas International, I think our culture and overall, we are actually very open to this, and we really will advise the people to take the time and unwind, to settle down the emotions. And if there's something which is work related, of course, it depends what kind of support that we can provide. But if it's really personal, we will definitely advise people to take the time off.
Okay, thank you, Sierra. Fahad, I'm going to come to you with that question, because I remember you saying somewhere that coming from work for Honstad, the office is open for anyone who wants to come kind of whenever they want. And I attended recently another talk by the HR director of Salesforce in the UK, and saying that the work has shifted more toward how do we produce work rather than when we are in the office. So how would Randstad or your client, your views on that particular question?
I think it's a very good question, and I think a lot of companies are experimenting different things in order to counter this, where people are feeling burnout, stress, or they, halfway in the middle of the day, someone feel like I don't think so I can continue working today. So I think it sits with the employers, where they need to train their managers to create the psychological safety in their environment, where if employees feel such, they should not be afraid to go speak to manager. And it's like, I'm not feeling well today. I don't think so I'll be productive. Can I take a half day off? Or I can apply for leave tomorrow or half day. We've been practicing this before even pandemic, because our employees work on a very strict KPIs, and it is quite common to see people are stressing out, having anxiety or burnout. So I think it sits with the employer to make sure their managers, they are creating the psychological safety, where employees should be able to come openly and say, this is how I'm feeling. And I think one of the things that has worked with us while we were conducting a different remote management trainings. So when we have 1 hour catch up with someone online, make sure we spend about 15 minutes to get to know them personally, how they're feeling, how was the day, how was the week you spent. And then before we start getting into more details about the work progress and all that. So I think it's a relation building with managers, with the leadership team, to counter this burnout and the stress out or anxiety that people might be feeling.
Okay, thank you very much, Fahad, from that. That leads me nicely to Tracy, because you mentioned it's the responsibility of the manager, and that's what both of you have said. Without going into an entire different presentation, Tracy, but often all the advice that you shared, they're good advice, but they're really hard for any individual to put into practice when we're in that space, right? So what advice would you, and again, from my own experience addressing that topic with clients, often the difficulty is the ability of managers to address that. It's fairly new for many leaders and managers to have to address mental health issue, and many of them feel ill-equipped. So a lot of training is going in that space. But what advice would you give to anyone in our audience or in organization, as leaders, as manager? How can you help when you see someone having that not being in a good space?
So my advice for managers specifically, if they would like their employees to feel comfortable to come and open up to them, is to show vulnerability on their side as well. Because most of the time, employees don't reach out to managers. It's obviously the superior sort of intimidating feeling that they feel from their managers. But if the managers are able to, show their employees or the subordinates that, hey, I'm human too, and some days I'm not okay, then it would make the employees feel more comfortable to reach out to them to say, I'm not okay today, and all this, of course, it starts with awareness. If the managers or even the organizations start by creating awareness within their company to talk about mental health, be it in a pantry or be it in an open cubicle. We're not asking you to share your deepest, darkest secret or whatever skeletons you have in the closet, but rather to say that we're all human and some days we don't feel like waking up from bed, and that's okay, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. And if the employees are able to recognize that it's okay to sort of have a mental health day, then they'll start noticing the change within the employees themselves to see that they will reach out slowly.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I think I like this idea of opening the conversation. I do have a few more questions, but I wonder if anyone in the audience has any other question. I can't see that in the Q&A, but feel free to add your question in there if you have any while you're typing, because I don't think we can unmute, right, Marco or Adeline? The audience cannot unmute in this format, or can they?
I think we can if they request for it.
Oh, they need to request, okay.
Yeah, we can arrange for that.
All right, so if you want to speak, request, then I'll...
You can also raise your hand maybe as an audience. If you want to pose a question, please go ahead.
Okay.
In the meantime, I think there were some other questions that you might have received directly in the chat, Marie.
In the chat, I missed this one.
Including the one for Randstad on the percentages for...
Okay, yes, so question to Fahad. Sorry, I missed the chat. Randstad statistics shows that 55% of employees will stay with employer because of the way they manage COVID response. In other words, 45% of employees are not impressed or less impressed by the employer's pandemic management. That's quite high. Will this result in much increased movement on the job market? And can employees afford to move in the current employment scenario?
Well, good pick on 55%, yes. So I think if we start comparing Malaysia with quite a lot of other countries where we have been one of the longest lockdown they've experienced, right? So a lot of employers did not have a choice to send their employees back home, and most of them working remotely, or some essential industries were working in more of a hybrid environment. I do see when we speak to a lot of organizations, HR or top management leadership has taken all the positive steps to make sure that people are feeling safe and secure. So I think when we conducted the survey, that remaining 45%, where some of them were forced to still come back to the office. Some of them the companies were not flexible. So these companies eventually will face some attrition. There are going to be people looking out and exploring job. There hasn't been much of a movement in terms of job changing compared to last couple of years in the employment market. 55% because they were quite happy and satisfied, and then 45% is or uncertainty in the market what kept them with the existing organization. But eventually the organizations who did not manage this COVID situation well and were forcing employees will definitely going to face attrition very soon.
Thank you very much, Fahad, for your question. Marco, did you see any question? I don't see any other question in the chat or in the QA. So I have one last question, one more question. We have 4 minutes left for all of you. With all issues of well-being in the workplace, we've seen also a surge in offer of mental health help. I know many of my clients, they've engaged companies will offer psychologists almost on demand. What is your take on that? Do you think that's an effective way to address well-being and mental health in the workplace? Have you tried it, and what has been the response in your organizations? Who wants to take my question? I think I've puzzled you guys here. Tracy?
Sorry, Marie, can you repeat your question again?
Okay, I'm just saying that a lot of apps have come out on the market to support mental health issues in the workplace, both in terms of increasing knowledge as well as offering support through psychologists and all. Is this something that you've tried? What has been the response? What's your take on that? Is it effective or not?
Sorry, Marie. Thank you for rephrasing that. Having all this sort of materials blasted out, it's a very good way to show employees that we're really serious about this. We want to talk about mental health. It's a great tool to start creating awareness, and it's something that the employees can do in their own time. Now, it shouldn't just stop at just having apps as reading materials. It should go on more than that, right? So after having this is a great start. It's a great sort of foundation, but more should be done in terms of just having talks or health promotional materials, as we call it. So like what Seer was talking about, what Thomas could do, things like gamifications, workshops, even at International SOS, we have that as well. So these workshops are very pertinent to gather all the employees together, because when we are grouped together, especially in a focus group, then we are more comfortable to actually open up on what's going on. And that's where the lesson starts. It sticks to us rather than just reading it on our own, and then we may not understand it or we may forget about it. So by having engagement with the employees or having workshops, getting a professional to come in to train, that's when the sort of objectives will be met, especially in terms of seeing an improvement in the mental health of the company or organization.
Thank you, Tracy, for your views. Sia, Fahad, anything you want to add on that topic?
Just like a quick and a very brief addition to that. So I agree with Tracy that knowing that you're not okay is great, but that doesn't automatically translate to action most of the time. So, well, for Thomas, we have that mental health first aiders. The reason why we have that program rolling out is because to make sure that it's being constantly, convey and communicated to the employees that it's an ongoing effort. So World Mental Health Day, mental health awareness, all those events, comes once a year. So it's a good time to remind us that how important mental health is, but it's not just the only time that we should really be paying attention. So it should be an ongoing efforts within a company. And I must say there's no one size fits all. So for instance, we have that Headspace subscription, if you may have heard of that. So we have that in the company, but not everyone finds it to be useful. Not everyone likes or feel meditation is going to help me, for instance. So, but you have got to make that available and say, if this is something which could be helpful to you, please utilize it. Yeah, so those are just my two cents.
Thank you very much, Siha. Fahad, we have, I'm out of time, but I'd like to hear your views before I conclude.
Yeah, I think, well, at Randstad as well, we've been offering this confidentiality. We maintain confidentiality. If anyone is interested or struggling with the mental health, we do offer a free counseling through a psychologist, and that is, someone can just reach out to HR. It will be kept confidential, and then they can engage in the conversation, and we arrange session for them. We've been doing this for many years globally, in pretty much any country we exist. My only take on this is, I think to some extent is my observation. I could be wrong too, but I realized that in Asia, where when it comes to discussion about psychiatrists or people struggling with some mental health, they try to hide, keep it confidential, and not openly speak about it, but which has to become more common. People need to be more open when they're struggling with something. I think that is more as in culture that we need to change it, where people need to be more open and discuss with us. If they're struggling in the organization, they should speak to their managers, leaders, or whoever they're dealing with in the business. Or as organizations, companies should speak more about it and make it sound like this is, as we just discussed about, if you are hurt physically, psychologically you could get hurt as well. You need to make it more common to find a way how you can overcome and heal. So that's my take on that.
Thank you very much, Fahad. So
Marie,
thank you.
Marie,
yes.
Apologies, there was one more question in the Q&A.
Okay.
It adds on a little bit to the last two questions, but maybe very short, gives the speakers an opportunity to give their take on how to voice out directly. I think this is quite an important question. Somebody in a position of reporting directly to the chairman who is totally stressed out and overloaded with daily work. quickly by all three speakers, maybe how to voice out directly.
Well, I read the question, if I understand correctly, is in this situation where I see, do we voice out the concern directly to chairman of the company if you're overloaded with work or work stress is really taking a toll? So first, if the company do not have any official channel of giving confidential feedback of how you're feeling, then there's no harm reaching out to someone senior who could make some changes. Seek out time, set up the appointment, say, can I have your 15 minutes or 20 minutes? And then have a discussion how you're feeling about the job. I'm pretty sure if there's a good employer, if they want to retain you, they would take action. And sometime top leadership would want to make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable, happy, and they're not feeling stressed out and burnout. But middle management might not be managing it well. It happens in some cases where there's no harm, where you can open up communication and see that other channels can help you. Rather than losing an employee, I'm sure employer will appreciate if someone openly coming, I like your organization, I like the job, it's just that I'm feeling differently, and see if anyone can help me.
Thank you, Fahad. Sia, Tracy, you okay with that answer? Do you want to add anything?
No, that was perfect. I think it's more or less your approach.
All right.
So there's no harm in voicing out, but again, you also have to reflect, how that approach will be like, because it's not really going against and say, I just don't like this and so on, but it really depends how you're going to approach the whole situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Sia. So I know I'm out of time by 4 minutes. So just to wrap it up, no, I'm okay. So just to wrap up, thank you to the three of you for your really valuable contribution. My takeaway from what you say is that first, the importance to create trust and empathy in the organization and create a culture of psychological safety where people can feel that it's okay to be vulnerable and make conversation around mental health the norm, that people feel that it's not a problem to talk about it. And through having the talks that you mentioned, Sia, so the people are used to coming together, as you mentioned, Tracy, so that we have that space to discuss and share how we feel and share our emotions. So thank you very much. Marco, I'm handing it back to you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Excellent job in an orange atmosphere. I felt that this was an excellent session, very, very useful, timely moment, because yes, slowly things are opening up again. We are going back to the office, which doesn't always mean back to the old normal. There is a new situation, that is quite fluid, can differ from one company to another, can differ from one person, one employee to another. So I think it was extremely useful to get this insight from Tracy, from Sia, and from Fahad. Thank you so much, all of you, for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be able to share slides with you. So we will post these in the MDBC website on the library, and this session can also be looked at again via our YouTube channel, as well as also via the library to get the right link. There will be a few closing slides that will also show you our upcoming events that Adeline is putting on the screen right now together with Jordan and our team in the office today. It's the first time again that we are running a webinar from the office, while I'm myself still in home quarantine at the moment after returning from the Netherlands. So it's all, as I said, a bit fluid. Everybody is in a different situation with regard to taking care of work. Thank you again for joining today. We had an excellent crowd, and thank you for excellent speakers. I learned a lot this session myself as well. Marie, Sia, Tracy, Fahad, thank you so much. Have a look at the closing slides, and have a great evening and upcoming Friday and weekend, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Fahad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marco.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.